In the past, many cruel experiments were conducted citing various reasons as justifications. Some scientists took lives in order to treat diseases, while others experimented with chemical weapons. We have compiled the most horrific experiments in history for you. 1. One of the most horrific experiments ever conducted in human history is the Unit 731 experiment carried out by the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Unit 731 was a secret biological and chemical warfare research unit that conducted terrifying human experiments on thousands of Chinese, Korean, and other war prisoners. The experiments included interventions without anesthesia to investigate the effects of diseases and injuries on the prisoners. 2. The Tuskegee experiment began in 1932, at a time when there was no known treatment for syphilis, a contagious venereal disease. After being recruited with the promise of free medical care, 600 African-American men in Macon County, Alabama, enrolled in the project aimed at studying the progression of the disease. These individuals were unaware that they had been deliberately infected with syphilis. 3. In this deadly experiment, the prisoners were the victims. The goal was to produce a tasteless and odorless poison that could not be detected post-mortem. Prisoners were unwittingly brought to a secret laboratory known as the Soviet Union's camera, or cell. Poisons such as ricin, mustard gas, digitoxin, curare, and cyanide were administered along with food and drinks as medication. They produced the dream poison named C2. This poison incapacitated the victims and killed them within 15 minutes. Most of the prisoners died in this gruesome medical experiment. 4. In 1939, a stuttering experiment was conducted on 22 orphan children in Iowa. The experiment, known worldwide as the Monster Study, was conducted by Wendell Johnson, a speech pathologist at the University of Iowa. All 22 orphans were divided into two groups. One group received positive therapy for fluent speech, while the other group received negative therapy and was criticized for speech flaws. As a result of this cruel and horrific experiment, some children experienced speech difficulties for the rest of their lives. 5. Marion Sims was revered for years as the father of modern gynecology. Unfortunately, all his knowledge about the female reproductive system stemmed from the horrific experiments he conducted on female slaves from 1845 to 1849. Sims performed surgeries on women over 30 times without anesthesia to obtain his understanding. 6. Experiment 4.1, conducted on the inhabitants of the Marshall Islands, was a brutal and horrific study. The indigenous people were exposed to nuclear radiation resulting from the Castle Bravo nuclear test. Instead of warning the residents about radiation, the U.S. government decided to remain silent and observe the effects of radiation for research purposes. This exposure increased stillbirths and birth defects. Many children had developmental issues. A third of the islanders developed tumors, leading to deaths due to the adverse effects of nuclear radiation. 7. Dr. Albert Kligman collaborated with Dow Chemicals and the U.S. Army in a gruesome medical experiment. This research was conducted under the guise of dermatological research, but in reality, it was to study the effects of Agent Orange on humans. Many prisoners were injected with a product known as dioxin. Subsequently, they developed cysts under their armpits, on their heads, and in their groins. At the end of the study, the prisoners continued to suffer from the effects of Agent Orange. 8. During the Cold War, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union were eager to discover if the human body could survive a nuclear attack. This cruel experiment was also conducted on African Americans. From 1960 to 1971, radiologist Eugene Sayenger exposed more than 88 cancer patients to high levels of radiation. These individuals were unaware that the experiment was funded by the Pentagon. They were told that the experiment could potentially help cure them. The patients were exposed to radiation for an hour. Nausea, vomiting, and mental confusion were side effects experienced by all patients. Most died from radiation poisoning. This experiment went down in history as the Cincinnati radiation experiments. 9. Homosexual men were not welcomed in the South African military. A cruel aversion project experiment was conducted to eliminate the homosexual population. All homosexuals were sent to a military hospital near Pretoria. These victims were subjected to electroshock therapy and chemical castrations to supposedly cure their sexual conditions. Men underwent gender reassignment surgeries against their will, and most lost their lives. 10. The Second World War was a time of cruel experiments. Many prisoners were exposed to streptococcus, tetanus, and gas gangrene. Glass shards and splinters of wood were inserted deep into the wounds of prisoners. The Japanese killed over 200,000 people in numerous experiments without any anesthesia. Wounds were opened without any form of anesthetic. Nazi doctors conducted genetically altering experiments on Jewish children. Thousands endured indescribable pain.